The sound of cutlery clinking against porcelain plates and the muffled murmur of conversations around me seemed to echo in my head, like a constant, irritating hum. I felt the blood pounding in my ears as I looked at that scene. There she was, sitting in front of him. A well-dressed man, with an easy smile and calculated gestures. Her hand rested gently on the table, too close to his. The red wine glowed in the glass like a late warning sign. I should have realized sooner. I should have felt it in the air, in the subtle changes, in the prolonged silences and in the mechanical kisses that replaced the warmth of the early years. But I didn't understand. Now it was there, in front of me. Concrete. Cruel. Irreversible. I walked towards them. I didn't think of what to say, but the words came out like a shot. That's my wife, but don't worry because she's yours now. It's over between me and her. Her gaze froze, a mixture of shock and fear. His arrogance. A slight shadow of discomfort, as if he had been caught in the act, but already prepared for any confrontation. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. I needed to get out of there before the pain swallowed me. Before my eyes gave away the weight of the world that had just crashed down on me. The streets outside seemed to spin as I walked aimlessly. The restaurant lights still glowed behind me, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. She didn't even try to come after me. There was no screaming, tears or pleading. Just silence. A silence that burned more than any words could burn. I loved her. God, how I loved her. For years, she was the reason I got up every morning, for enduring the pain and sacrifices. And in the end, is that how it ended? At an expensive dinner, at a well-set table, exchanging glances with a man who knew nothing about what we built together. I went home that night not knowing whether I should cry, scream, or just break down. The smell of her perfume was still on the pillow. I looked around and everything seemed out of place, even though it was exactly as I left it. The picture frames held fake smiles now, frozen moments of a lie. I took off the ring and threw it on the table. The metallic sound echoed throughout the empty room. I knew that would be the last night that house would be mine. Tomorrow, I would start getting rid of her like I got rid of the ring. But for now, the pain needed to be felt. And I felt it. Every second. The next morning I began the process. I called the lawyer, cancelled the shared credit cards and closed the joint accounts. I deleted her messages on my cell phone and removed the photos, but none of these actions brought the expected relief. Every click, every signature, every practical decision only reinforced the emptiness. So, like an addict, I went after her. I wanted answers. I needed them. But what I found destroyed me even more. The lover. He wasn't just any stranger. He had been a part of her life for much longer than I could have imagined. With every step I took, the web of lies became more tangled. Friends who knew and said nothing. Messages deleted but recovered. Gifts that I thought were for me, but were bought for him. And the worst? They were not sorry. She looked me in the eyes and said she didn't plan on leaving me. I just wanted a different experience. I was an accessory, a safe haven for her, while she sought excitement with someone else. The lover. He smiled as if none of it was important. Like I was just an obstacle that had finally been removed from their path. But fate has a cruel way of balancing things. And what started as an act of betrayal turned into a nightmare for both of them. Everything fell apart. Friends moved away. Her family rejected her. And the lover? He wasn't as trustworthy as he seemed. You betrayed her the same way she betrayed me. I heard the rumors. I saw the messages. And in the end, she was the one who begged to come back. But there was something about her that could no longer be saved. Something broken that not even regret could fix. I moved on. Or tried. But every time I thought I had left it all behind, another piece of that night would come back to haunt me. There was something I still didn't know. Something that transformed that betrayal into something much bigger, dirtier and crueler than I imagined. Something that, when revealed, changed not only how I felt about her, but also how I saw everything I experienced with her. I thought I had already discovered the worst. But the worst was yet to come. Welcome to the channel where secrets are revealed and painful truths come to light. Here, we do not support, justify or romanticize any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional, but they carry real and profound lessons about how infidelity can devastate lives, destroy relationships, and leave irreversible scars. Get ready, because the story you are about to hear is intense, full of twists and turns and raw emotions. Take a deep breath. Betrayal has a price, and today you will see what happens when that price needs to be paid. Good story. Daniel always believed he had everything a man could want. A comfortable house with large windows that let the sun flood into every corner of the living room, a steady job that provided security and occasional travel, and most of all, he had Emily. She was the type of woman who captured eyes wherever she went, not only because of her obvious beauty, but because of her engaging presence and charismatic manner that made any environment lighter. When they met years ago, Daniel knew Emily would be his wife before they even finished their first dinner together. He used to joke that it was love at first word, because it was her voice, so sweet and firm at the same time, that made him realize he didn't want anyone else by his side. Emily was an artist. He liked vibrant colors, large canvases, and broad brushstrokes. Her studio occupied one of the rooms in the house, and Daniel loved watching her as she lost herself in her projects. There was a passion in the way Emily created, a sparkle in her eyes that made him proud to be the man who inspired her. Or at least he believed he was. He used to sit in an armchair in the corner, watching silently as she painted. She said he was her greatest source of inspiration, and Daniel believed that without question. For him, Emily represented perfection and, therefore, he never imagined that he needed to look over his shoulder or worry about any shadow in his life. In the early years of their marriage, they were inseparable. They traveled whenever they could, tried new restaurants and didn't miss the chance to discover something together that made them laugh. Daniel was a man of routine, but with Emily by his side, life seemed more spontaneous. She balanced her insecurities with words of encouragement and broke her rigidity with unexpected adventures. When he worried about deadlines at work or bills to pay, Emily laughed and said that everything always found a way to be resolved. And somehow, he believed her. But time has a subtle way of changing things. Small details that once seemed inconsequential began to accumulate like dust on forgotten furniture. Romantic dinners became sporadic, trips gave way to work commitments, and broad smiles were replaced by brief waves before everyone went their own way. Daniel noticed the changes, but chose to ignore them. He justified to himself that it was just the weight of routine, the kind of thing every couple faces. Emily also seemed distant, but he always found an explanation. Maybe it was the stress of a new exhibit or the pressure to keep the creative juices flowing. When Emily started spending more time outside, Daniel wasn't immediately worried. She was always sociable, enjoyed meeting friends and participating in artistic events. He trusted her. He trusted her so much that, even when she arrived late, claiming to have lost track of time while talking to colleagues, he just smiled and kissed her forehead. If there was something wrong, he preferred not to see it. His greatest weakness was the fear of losing what he valued so much, so he ignored the signs, convinced himself that everything was fine and moved on. Lonely nights began to become more frequent. Daniel found solace in work, immersing himself in reports and meetings to avoid thinking about the emptiness he felt upon returning home. He found himself staring at his phone, waiting for messages that didn't come, and trying to shake off the uneasiness that was beginning to build within him. But still, he didn't question it. Emily always came home with a smile on her face and a convincing excuse. And Daniel believed because he wanted to believe. He clung to the image of the past, the love he felt and the commitment they made to each other at the altar. Their wedding anniversary was approaching, and Daniel wanted to do something special. He bought tickets to a play he knew Emily would love and planned a surprise dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. He imagined her expression when she saw the carefully planned details and felt his heart warm with anticipation. For him, that would be a fresh start. A reminder of everything they once were and could still be. Emily seemed excited when he told her the plans, but there was something in her eyes that bothered him. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it stuck in his memory like a crack in a seemingly intact wall. In the days leading up to the event, Daniel noticed Emily more distracted than usual. She spent hours on the phone, laughing at something he couldn't hear, and deleted the messages as soon as she finished the conversations. He scolded himself for thinking nonsense, for harboring unfounded suspicions. After all, Emily was always transparent with him, always open and honest. Why would it be any different now? He blamed himself for letting work interfere with his marriage and promised himself he would make up for lost time. When the big day arrived, Daniel was as nervous as a teenager on his first date. He dressed carefully, made sure everything was perfect and arrived at the restaurant in advance to adjust the last details. He waited for Emily, imagining the sparkle in her eyes when she walked in and saw the effort he made to rekindle the flame between them. But Emily didn't show up. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Daniel tried to call, but her phone was off. Finally, he decided to wait a little longer, convincing himself that she must have been stuck in traffic or had been late at the studio. Until, suddenly, he saw her. Emily was there, on the other side of the restaurant. But she was not alone. Daniel had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The man sitting in front of her held her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They laughed, shared complicit glances and toasted as if the world around them didn't exist. Daniel felt his stomach drop and the air escape his lungs. He stood up, but his feet felt stuck to the floor. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe. Emily turned her face, and for a brief second, their eyes met. It was at that moment that Daniel knew that nothing would be the same again. He walked to the table, and each step seemed to echo through the silent room. The man next to her looked up, and Emily went still, as if she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but there was no anger or desperation in his voice, just a biting calm. And as the words came out, he felt like he was giving away everything he had left. She was his, but now she wasn't anymore. And at that moment, Daniel knew that that night would be just the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel spent days trying to understand what he had seen that night at the restaurant. He replayed the scene in his mind, analyzing every gesture, every look exchanged between Emily and the unknown man. He tried to convince himself that he was interpreting everything wrong, that maybe he was just a friend, a coworker, someone with no meaning. But the touch of their hands, the proximity of their bodies, the sparkle in her eyes, none of that left room for innocent interpretations. The truth was like a shadow, always present, growing with each hour he spent alone in that house that now seemed too big. Emily continued to act as if nothing had happened, but Daniel could no longer see the woman he knew. Her every smile seemed fake, every word she spoke sounded rehearsed. He wanted to confront her, he wanted answers, but at the same time he was afraid of what he might hear. So he waited. Observed. And he began to notice details that he had previously ignored. The nights when Emily said she was in the studio, but arrived home without the smell of paint or traces of brushes on her hands. The messages deleted from her cell phone, the calls answered outside the house and the way she looked away when he asked something more direct. Daniel started leaving work early, hoping to surprise her at home, but he almost always found her already dressed up, ready to leave, saying she had commitments related to her work. He tried to act normal, kiss her on the forehead and smile, but he knew something was wrong. And when Emily was late again, arriving home after midnight with increasingly lame excuses, he decided he could ignore the signs no longer. The trust he once had in her was quickly crumbling, leaving only a void that he couldn't fill. On the third Saturday in a row that she went out to meet friends, Daniel decided to follow her. It wasn't difficult. Emily seemed too confident, too carefree. She drove to a distant neighborhood, where she parked in front of an inconspicuous but elegant building. He stayed in the car, watching as she got in. The minutes dragged by. With each person who passed on the sidewalk, Daniel expected them to leave, but that didn't happen. After almost an hour, he felt the anxiety turn into an unbearable weight in his chest. I needed answers. He decided to get out of the car and entered the building, trying to remain calm. He asked at reception about Emily, making up some excuse, but no one could tell. That's when he noticed a restaurant next to the building. The glass walls revealed well-set tables, low lights, and couples chatting in intimate tones. And there she was. Sitting at the same table he had seen her at the other night, with the same man. They laughed, as if sharing a secret, something only the two of them understood. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He couldn't move, couldn't think. He just watched as she held the man's hand for a long time before letting go to pick up the wine glass. That's when something inside him broke. He pushed open the restaurant door and walked to the table. Emily saw him approaching and, for a moment, she didn't seem to know what to do. The man looked up, frowning as if Daniel were an unwanted interruption. But it was Emily who spoke first, her voice shaking, trying to maintain her composure. She asked what he was doing there, but Daniel ignored the question and turned to the man. He just said that this was his wife, but that he didn't need to worry, because she was his now. He turned and left before either of them could respond. The walk to the car was a blur. The street lights seemed brighter, almost blinding him as he tried to process what had just happened. The sound of shoes on asphalt echoed as if he were walking through an empty tunnel. When he got into the car, his hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He wanted to scream, to break something, but the silence inside the vehicle seemed to suffocate him. He stayed there for a while, staring at the dashboard until the phone vibrated. It was a message from Emily. She said she could explain, that it wasn't what it seemed, but Daniel deleted the message without responding. Nothing she said would change what he had seen. Over the next few days, Emily tried to talk to him several times. She left messages on his cell phone, notes at his house and even showed up at his work, but Daniel avoided her. He didn't want to hear excuses, he didn't want explanations. The image of her with the other man was engraved in his mind, and he knew he would never be able to forget it. Still, something bothered him. As much as he knew that Emily had betrayed his trust, there was one detail he couldn't understand. The man in the restaurant didn't seem surprised or uncomfortable by his presence. On the contrary, there was something in his expression, something almost defiant. As if I already expected that. Daniel wondered if that was just arrogance or if there was something more behind the story. The tension between them increased. Emily kept trying to justify her actions, but Daniel refused to listen to her. He slept on the couch, avoided looking at her and started spending more time outside the house. But the further away he got, the more questions arose. Who was that man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why did Emily look so calm, like she knew this wouldn't be the end? These questions kept him up at night, tossing and turning on the couch as he tried to find answers that didn't come. Then one day, Emily stopped trying. She left the house in the morning and did not return that night. Daniel waited, looking at the clock, but there were no calls or messages. The next day, she still hadn't returned. And that's how he knew something much bigger was happening. The betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. Emily was hiding something, something that could change everything he thought he knew about their marriage. And, for the first time since it all began, Daniel felt more than anger. He felt scared. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The silence in the house seemed heavier than ever, as if the walls had absorbed every unspoken word, every swallowed tear. He was looking at his cell phone on the table, waiting for a call or text from Emily, but nothing came. Time passed, and her absence began to become a hole in his chest. He knew he needed answers. He got up from the sofa, put on his jacket and left without knowing exactly where he was going. He just drove, guided by the need to confront her, to demand the truth. He arrived at the address he had written down the night he followed her and saw her car parked outside. The building's door was unlocked, as if fate wanted to facilitate its entry. He went up the stairs and stopped in front of the apartment door. He took a deep breath before knocking. When Emily opened it, her face was filled with an expression of shock. She tried to close the door, but Daniel held on tight and entered. The man from the restaurant was there, sitting on the couch, with a bored expression that made Daniel's blood boil. Emily asked him to leave, but Daniel refused. He asked who this man was and how long this had been going on. Emily hesitated, as if the words weighed too much, but finally she began to speak. She said the man was called Victor and that he had been involved with her for a few months. Daniel laughed nervously, asking if that was all, if she really thought he would believe such a shallow excuse. He wanted to know why she acted like she wasn't afraid of losing everything, why she kept insisting that she could explain. Emily looked at Victor, as if seeking permission to speak, and at that moment Daniel realized that something much bigger was about to be revealed. Emily asked him to sit down, but Daniel stood. She began by saying that what was happening wasn't just about cheating. She said that Victor was not only a lover, but also a man who knew secrets from her past. Daniel remained silent, waiting for her to continue, and that was when the truth came out. Emily revealed that years ago, before she even met Daniel, she had been involved with Victor. They had a brief but intense relationship, and the breakup was not amicable. Victor, feeling rejected, held resentment and years later reappeared in her life with information that could destroy her. She explained that Victor had proof of something she never told Daniel. Before they were married, Emily had made a mistake that left her vulnerable. She had embezzled money from a gallery where she worked. When Victor discovered this, he threatened to expose everything if she didn't cooperate. Emily tried to resist, but he was persistent. At first, it was just a request for money, but soon the demands began to grow. She said she gave in to her fear, doing what he asked to protect Daniel and their marriage. But Victor didn't stop there. He wanted more. She wanted control, she wanted power, and Emily ended up trapped in a cycle of blackmail and manipulation. Daniel listened to everything in silence, feeling the ground disappear beneath his feet. He asked her why she never trusted him, why she chose to deal with this alone. Emily cried, saying she was afraid he would hate her, that he would leave her if he knew what she had done. She begged for forgiveness, saying that the betrayal meant nothing, that everything she did was to protect him. Daniel looked at Victor, who was smiling as if he were in control, and felt a mixture of anger and disgust. He advanced towards the man, demanding that he leave, but Victor just laughed, saying that Emily was not the woman he thought she was. Daniel shouted at him to shut up, but Victor continued to provoke, saying that Emily had already crossed boundaries that could not be erased. He described encounters, intimate details, while Emily cried, asking them to stop. Daniel walked away, feeling the weight of the words fall on him like blows. He asked Emily if that was true, if she had really done everything Victor said. She shook her head, unable to respond. Daniel's anger increased with every second. He took out his cell phone and threatened to call the police, but Victor smiled, saying he had already prepared everything. He said that if Daniel tried anything, the evidence against Emily would be sent to the authorities. Emily begged him not to do it, saying that she could fix it, that she just needed time. But Daniel no longer knew who to trust. He looked at her one last time before leaving. The tears in Emily's eyes followed him to the door, but he didn't stop. He felt like he was coming out of a nightmare, but he knew the pain was just beginning. As he went down the stairs, he realized there was no turning back. Emily had destroyed not only their marriage, but also his trust in everything he believed in. And Victor, with his arrogant smile, was still there, like a shadow from the past that refused to disappear. When he got to the car, Daniel realized he couldn't just leave things like that. He needed to find a way to free himself from that situation, to get rid of Victor and, at the same time, find out if there was still something about Emily that could be saved. But deep down, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal was just the beginning. The real enemy was there, watching, waiting for his next move. And Daniel needed to be prepared. Daniel drove aimlessly, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. Emily's words echoed in his mind like hammers. Her confession, Victor's blackmail and physical betrayal were mixed together in a whirlwind of images and sounds that he couldn't organize. Emily's face, with tears streaming down and desperate eyes, kept coming back to memory, but it was Victor's cold smile that burned like fire. He needed answers, but most of all, he needed control. And at that moment, I felt like I didn't have any. He parked the car in front of a small bar. He didn't remember driving there, but he needed something to keep him upright. He came in and sat at the counter. He ordered a double whiskey and drank it in one gulp, feeling the liquid burn his throat. Asked for another. Emily's voice still echoed, saying that everything she did was to protect him. Protect him from what? From shame? From prison? Or was it, deep down, just to protect herself? Daniel shook his head, trying to clear his doubts, but he knew he couldn't keep running. I needed to face that. I needed to face her. When he returned home, he found Emily sitting on the couch, hugging her legs, her eyes red and swollen. She raised her head when she saw him enter, but remained silent. Daniel closed the door tightly, making it clear he was there to get answers. Emily started talking before he even said anything. She said that Victor had started with subtle threats, saying he knew about the money embezzled from the gallery, but soon the demands grew. First, he asked for small amounts of money. Then he started asking for more. When she could no longer hide the expenses, he proposed another type of payment. Emily cried as she explained, but Daniel stood firm. He wanted details. He wanted to understand every step that took her to that restaurant and made him feel like he had lost his ground. She said she tried to cut off contact, but Victor knew exactly how to manipulate her. He said that if she didn't give in, he would not only destroy her reputation, but he would also drag Daniel along. He had enough evidence to implicate him, even if he had nothing to do with what she did. Daniel was silent for a moment, absorbing the words. Then he asked her if, at any point, she had liked it. Emily stood up, shaking her head in denial, saying that all she wanted was to protect what they had. Daniel took a step back, as if her words were toxic. He asked her why she never trusted him to deal with it together. Emily tried to get closer, but he raised his hand, stopping her. He said he no longer knew who she was. Emily fell to the floor, crying. She said she was willing to do anything to make amends for what she did, to try to save the marriage. But Daniel couldn't hear her anymore. He left the house again, leaving her kneeling in the living room. He drove to a hotel but couldn't sleep. He spent hours looking at the ceiling, thinking about how everything got to that point. He thought about calling a lawyer, but something stopped him. It wasn't just the marriage that was at stake, it was also the feeling of having been deceived by someone he loved. When the sun began to rise, he decided to return home. Emily was still there, sitting in the same place. The eyes were empty, as if they had lost all hope. She looked at him when he entered, but said nothing. Daniel sat in the chair opposite her and asked what she intended to do about Victor. Emily said she had already tried to negotiate, but he always came back with new demands. She confessed that she was afraid he would never stop. Daniel was silent for a moment before asking if she was willing to fight. Emily nodded, but he needed to see more than words. Over the next few days, Daniel began gathering information about Victor. He discovered that the man had a history of financial manipulation and had previously been investigated for fraud, but always managed to escape due to lack of evidence. Daniel knew he needed to be careful. Any wrong move could put Emily in danger or destroy the chances of resolving this without further consequences. Emily tried to get closer to him, but Daniel still maintained an emotional distance. She said she loved him, that she never wanted to hurt him, but he couldn't forget the image of her with Victor. However, something inside him still clung to the hope that they could overcome this. As hurt as he was, a part of him still wanted to believe that Emily was the woman he married. Finally, it was time for confrontation. Emily arranged to meet Victor under the pretense of handing over more money, but Daniel was hiding nearby. He watched as she sat at the table with him. Victor looked confident, gesturing and smiling as if he had complete control. Emily looked nervous, but Daniel knew she was determined. When Victor mentioned yet another demand, Emily stood up, saying that it needed to stop. Victor laughed, asking what she would do about it. It was at that moment that Daniel appeared. Victor tried to get up, but Daniel pushed him back into the chair. He said he knew everything, that he had enough evidence to put an end to him if he continued with the threats. Victor tried to hide his concern, but Daniel saw the fear in his eyes. He said that if he didn't disappear, he would use all the information he gathered to put him behind bars. Victor tried to argue, saying that Daniel had nothing against him. But Daniel threw an envelope on the table, with documents and photos that proved his crimes. Victor took the envelope, leafed through the pages and remained silent. Emily looked at Daniel, surprised by his determination. For the first time in weeks, he felt that perhaps there was still hope. Victor got up, took the envelope and left without saying a word. Emily fell into Daniel's arms, but he was still stiff. He said that didn't mean everything was resolved between them. She agreed, saying she knew they would need time to rebuild trust. In the following days, Daniel remained alert, waiting for any movement from Victor, but the man disappeared. Emily began attending therapy and tried to reconnect with Daniel, but he was still torn. A part of him wanted to forgive her, but another part feared he would never be able to forget what happened. As they walked together through this painful process, Daniel realized that, regardless of the outcome, he had changed. The confidence that was once unshakable was now fragile. He knew the future would be uncertain, but he was willing to face it, even if it meant starting over alone. Daniel felt the weight of the days that followed the confrontation with Victor as if he were carrying stones on his shoulders. Even after the man disappeared, leaving behind only the smell of cheap cigarettes and a trail of empty threats, tension remained permeated in the house. Emily tried to act like everything could go back to normal, making silent breakfasts and leaving short, anxious texts when he left the house. But Daniel didn't respond. He observed her gestures, her tired eyes and her trembling voice whenever she tried to start a conversation, but he still kept his distance. She felt as if every word exchanged was a reminder of how much she had hidden from him and, worse, how naive he had been. The nights were the worst. Emily slept in their room, but Daniel stayed on the couch, claiming he needed space. He could hear the sound of her footsteps walking up and down the floor, as if she were trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret that wouldn't let her rest. But he wasn't moved. He no longer knew how to look at her without remembering the moments he felt betrayed, not just by her body, but by her destroyed trust and the lies carefully constructed over the months. Emily insisted that she was in therapy, that she was willing to face her mistakes, but Daniel couldn't decide if this was a sign of genuine regret or just a desperate effort to save something that was already broken. He spent hours driving aimlessly after work, trying to find clarity. I watched couples walking hand in hand, innocent smiles on faces that didn't know the pain of mistrust. She felt a knot in her stomach when she thought about how much she had given herself to the idea of a perfect marriage, how much she had believed that their love was enough to weather any storm. But now, all he saw was the wreckage of something he didn't know if he could rebuild. I thought about the advice from friends, the messages that some sent when they found out what happened, telling them to move on, to give themselves a new chance, but the words sounded empty. Emily tried to schedule dinners, suggested short trips so they could spend more time together away from that house that now seemed haunted by the ghosts of the past. Daniel refused all attempts. He said he needed time, but he knew that time alone wouldn't heal what he felt. He began combing through documents, bank accounts and financial records, looking for any details he might have missed. I needed to know if there was still something hidden, some buried truth that could overturn the little control I still had over the situation. He found strange transactions, transfers to unknown accounts that made him question everything once again. He confronted Emily, and she cried, saying that she had used the money to pay Victor, but Daniel couldn't believe it. She felt that each answer was full of half-truths, as if she was still protecting something. The days continued to drag on, and the tension between them reached its limit. Emily suggested they sell the house and start over somewhere else, but Daniel refused. He said he wasn't ready to abandon everything they built, even though every corner of the house reminded him of what he had lost. Emily begged him to give it a real chance, but Daniel just left the house once again, driving to a park where he used to run to clear his mind. He sat down on a bench and stared at the lake, watching the reflections of light on the water. He thought about how peaceful everything seemed on the surface, but he knew that below, the currents were still moving. When he returned home that night, he found Emily sitting on the porch, hugging her knees. She looked at him with red, swollen eyes, but said nothing. Daniel walked past her without speaking, but before entering, he heard her voice asking him to stop. Emily said she couldn't live with that constant doubt any longer, that she couldn't keep trying alone. She asked him if he still loved her, if there was still something inside him capable of forgiving her. Daniel was silent for a long time before replying that he didn't know. Emily cried, but didn't insist. He said he understood and would do whatever he wanted, even if it meant leaving him. That night, Daniel lay awake, listening to the sound of rain hitting the window. He thought about Emily's words, about her vulnerability and how, despite everything, he still had feelings for her. But I also knew that love alone wouldn't erase what had happened. He thought of all the times he felt small, betrayed, and powerless. She thought about Victor and the look of superiority he gave her before leaving. The anger returned with a vengeance, but this time it was mixed with a sense of determination. He wouldn't let Victor continue to control their lives, even from a distance. I needed to make a decision. The next morning, he called Emily to talk. He said he was willing to try, but things needed to change. He said he couldn't promise he would forgive, but he was willing to rebuild trust as long as she was honest about everything. Emily agreed, saying she would do whatever was necessary. They began attending therapy together, but the sessions were difficult. Daniel fought the urge to give up, the feeling that he was just prolonging the inevitable. Emily tried hard to show that she had changed, but every little mistake made Daniel question whether he was making the right decision. Still, they continued, step by step, trying to find a way back to each other. One night, while Emily slept, Daniel stayed in the living room looking at old photos. He saw genuine smiles, moments of happiness that seemed so far away now. He wondered if he would ever be able to feel that again or if he was just holding on to an illusion. He picked up his cell phone and started looking for houses to rent, thinking if perhaps a fresh start far away was the only solution. But before making any decision, I knew I needed to face one more difficult conversation with Emily. He went upstairs and stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her sleep. He felt a mix of sadness and hope, but also a weight on his shoulders. He knew that this fight was still far from over, and the end, whatever it was still to come. Daniel woke up before dawn to the sound of light rain tapping against the windows. The house was silent, but he felt the weight of what he needed to do that day. He stood up slowly, as if any sudden movement could break the fragile balance that still existed between him and Emily. He walked to the kitchen, prepared a coffee and stood there looking at the cup, as if searching for answers in the steam that was slowly rising. I could feel the bitter taste in my mouth, but I knew that the bitterness came from within, not from the coffee. I was tired, but not the kind of tiredness that sleep resolves. It was accumulated wear and tear, the weight of months of distrust, betrayal and secrets. I knew that would be the day I would put an end to everything, one way or another. Emily came downstairs shortly after, her red eyes indicating that she hadn't slept either. She looked at Daniel as if trying to decipher what he was thinking, but he avoided her gaze. He asked her if she wanted coffee, and she accepted, sitting at the table with her hands shaking. The silence between them was almost unbearable, but Daniel knew he needed to keep it for a few more minutes. Emily started talking, saying that she knew he was still hurt and that she understood if he couldn't continue. She said that, as much as she loved him, she also couldn't bear to live in that uncertainty, in that painful wait for something that might never happen. Daniel took a deep breath, placing the cup on the table before answering. He said that he couldn't continue like that either, that he needed something concrete, a decision that would free them from that endless cycle of pain and regret. Emily began to cry, but he remained firm. He said he had hired a lawyer to begin the separation process, but would not do so immediately. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth, no omissions, no lies. Emily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hands, and began to tell everything again, but this time in more detail. He admitted that Victor had not only threatened to reveal the embezzlement of money, but also had evidence of compromising messages and photos that could destroy her reputation and even lead to criminal prosecution. She revealed that, in a moment of desperation, she even considered running away, but that she always came back because of him, because of the love she still felt. Daniel listened to everything in silence, feeling each word like a blow. He said the only way she could move forward was if she faced the consequences of what she did. Emily agreed, saying she was willing to turn herself in and confess everything to the authorities if necessary. Daniel was silent for a moment before saying that this might be the only way for her to regain respect for herself. But he knew that that decision also meant the definitive end of their marriage. Emily cried again, but this time she didn't try to convince him otherwise. I knew I had lost Daniel, even though he was still there physically. Over the next few days, Emily sought out a lawyer and began the confession process. She was investigated and, although she managed to get a deal to reduce her sentence, her reputation was destroyed. Friends moved away, customers disappeared and the studio had to be closed. She moved to a small apartment and started rebuilding her life from scratch, but the void left by Daniel accompanied her every day. She tried to keep in touch, but he never responded. Daniel sold the house and moved to a smaller apartment. He spent months trying to reconnect with himself, trying to understand what he wanted for the future. It was difficult to trust anyone again, but over time he started attending social events and opening himself up to new experiences. He met someone, a kind and attentive woman who knew how to respect his space. It was a slow process, but for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he could breathe without the weight of the past on his shoulders. Victor, on the other hand, was not so lucky. His frauds were exposed when Daniel turned over the evidence he had gathered to the authorities. He tried to escape, but was captured and convicted. His downfall was swift and final, and news of the case spread quickly. Daniel felt a strange sense of relief knowing that this man would finally face the consequences of his actions. Emily followed everything from a distance. I learned about Daniel's new relationship and tried to find comfort in the fact that he seemed happy. But, at night, he still found himself looking at old photos and remembering the good times they shared. I knew I had destroyed something precious and that no amount of regret would be enough to fix it. Daniel, on the other hand, knew that that story would always be a part of him. He learned to accept the scars as part of the growing process, but promised himself he would never ignore the warning signs again. He understood that love needs to be built on truth and trust, and that without this, there is no basis capable of sustaining a relationship. If you've made it this far, now we want to know what you thought of this story. Share your opinion in the comments and say which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Remember, this channel does not support cheating of any kind. Our stories show how infidelity can destroy lives and serve as a warning for people to value honesty and respect in their relationships. Thank you for following until the end and until the next story.